Alaska Baker hunted women like animals. The Robert Hansen story. Part 2. By the summer of 1983, investigators in Anchorage found themselves facing a disturbing possibility. For years, women had been disappearing. Bodies had been discovered in remote wilderness locations. Rumors circulated about a serial killer operating in Alaska. Now, thanks to Cindy Paulson's escape, detectives finally had a potential suspect. But proving it would not be easy. Robert Hansen looked nothing like the monster described by investigators. He was a successful businessman. He owned a bakery. He had a wife and children. He had no reputation for violence. To many people, the idea that Hansen could be responsible for multiple murders seemed absurd. Yet detectives could not ignore the growing evidence. Paulson had identified him. She had described his vehicle. Police confirmed that Hansen owned the airplane she claimed her attacker intended to use. The similarities were impossible to overlook. Investigators soon realized they needed help. One of the people brought into the case was FBI profiler John Douglas. Douglas would later become one of the most famous criminal profilers in history and served as inspiration for characters in books, documentaries, and television series. After reviewing the evidence, Douglas developed a profile of the killer. His conclusions surprised many investigators. Douglas believed the suspect would likely be an experienced hunter, someone who felt inadequate around women, someone who compensated for feelings of rejection by seeking complete control over vulnerable victims, someone who appeared ordinary on the surface but harbored violent fantasies beneath that exterior. As detectives listened to the profile, one name kept emerging. Robert Hansen. The description matched him almost perfectly. The profile wasn't evidence by itself, but it strengthened investigators' belief that they were looking in the right direction. Now they needed proof. Detectives began examining Hansen's background more closely. What they found was alarming. Over the years, numerous missing women had disappeared from areas where Hansen was known to spend time. Several victims shared similar characteristics. Many worked as dancers or sex workers. Most were young women living on the margins of society. They were exactly the kind of victims serial predators often target. Not because they are easier to attack, but because society sometimes fails to notice when they disappear. As the investigation intensified, police obtained warrants allowing them to search Hansen's property. What they discovered would become one of the most important breakthroughs in the case. Among Hansen's belongings was a map. At first glance, it looked ordinary, but investigators noticed something unusual. Various locations had been marked with symbols and annotations. Those markings immediately attracted attention. When authorities compared the map to known recovery sites of murder victims, they noticed something chilling. Several marks corresponded with locations where bodies had already been discovered. Suddenly, the map looked less like a personal travel record and more like a guide to murder scenes. Investigators also found firearms matching weapons that could have been used in the killings. Additional evidence linked Hansen to multiple victims. The case against him was growing stronger. Still, detectives wanted to know the full truth. How many women had died? How long had the murders been occurring? What exactly had happened in the Alaskan wilderness? The answers would emerge after Hansen was finally confronted. Faced with mounting evidence, Hansen eventually entered negotiations with prosecutors. The evidence was overwhelming. The survivor testimony, the map, the recovered bodies, the physical evidence. Investigators believed they had finally cornered Alaska's most dangerous predator. Eventually, Hansen agreed to cooperate. What he revealed shocked even experienced detectives. According to his confessions, the murders stretched back for years. The exact number of victims remains debated. Authorities officially linked him to at least 17 murders. Some investigators suspect the true number may have been higher. Many missing persons cases from that era remain unsolved. Remote regions of Alaska still conceal secrets that may never be uncovered. Hansen explained how he selected victims. Most were vulnerable women he encountered around Anchorage. He frequently targeted women he believed would be less likely to generate immediate police attention. After abducting them, he transported them to isolated locations. Sometimes he assaulted them before taking them into the wilderness. Then came the most horrifying part, the hunt. According to investigators, Hansen's obsession with hunting had evolved into something far darker than ordinary violence. For years, hunting had given him feelings of control and power. Eventually, those fantasies merged with his crimes. He reportedly viewed victims as prey. Once transported to remote areas, they found themselves completely alone. Thousands of square miles of wilderness surrounded them. No roads, no nearby homes, no realistic chance of finding help. Many victims likely realized the truth almost immediately. Even if they escaped temporarily, survival was unlikely. Alaska's wilderness can be unforgiving. Temperatures can drop rapidly. Terrain becomes dangerous. Visibility disappears. Wildlife poses additional threats. And somewhere nearby, Hansen was waiting, armed, experienced, patient. Unlike his victims, he knew the terrain. He knew how to track movement. He knew how fear affects decision-making. He had spent years developing those skills. The advantage was overwhelmingly in his favor. The psychological terror experienced by the victims is almost impossible to imagine. Many likely spent their final moments running through unfamiliar forests, desperately searching for safety that did not exist. Investigators later recovered remains from remote areas that were accessible only by aircraft. The locations supported Cindy Paulson's account and Hansen's confessions. One by one, victims were finally identified. For families who had spent years wondering what happened to loved ones, the discoveries brought painful answers. Among the known victims were women whose disappearances had once attracted little attention. Some had been dismissed as runaways. Others had simply vanished without explanation. Now investigators understood why. The killer had hidden them in one of the most remote environments in North America. The isolation that attracted tourists and adventurers had also protected a murderer. As news of the case became public, shock spread throughout Alaska. Many residents struggled to believe that such crimes had occurred for so long without detection. Others were disturbed by how ordinary Hansen appeared. People often imagine serial killers as obviously sinister individuals. The reality is frequently different. Many blend seamlessly into society. Neighbors later described Hansen as quiet and unremarkable. Customers remembered him as a hardworking baker. People who interacted with him regularly had no idea they were speaking with a serial killer. That contrast remains one of the most unsettling aspects of the case. By day, Hansen sold baked goods. By night, according to investigators, he became a predator. The duality fascinated psychologists and criminologists. How could one individual maintain two completely different identities? Experts believe part of the answer lies in compartmentalization. Hansen separated his public life from his private fantasies. To outsiders, he appeared normal. Internally, however, investigators believe he nurtured violent desires for years. The resentment and rejection he experienced during childhood may have contributed to those fantasies. Of course, millions of people experience bullying and loneliness without becoming violent criminals. No single factor explains serial murder. But psychologists studying Hansen often point to a combination of personal grievances, social isolation, sexual violence, and obsession with control. Together, those factors may have created a dangerous psychological mix. The criminal proceedings moved forward. In 1984, Hansen accepted a plea agreement. Rather than forcing families through lengthy trials, prosecutors secured confessions and information regarding victims. He pleaded guilty to multiple murders and additional crimes. The agreement allowed investigators to recover more remains and provide answers to grieving families. The court sentenced Hansen to hundreds of years in prison. There would be no possibility of release. For the first time in many years, the women of Anchorage could feel safer knowing the killer was no longer free. Yet questions remained. Could more victims still be undiscovered? Were there crimes that Hansen never confessed to? Would every victim ever be identified? Even today, some uncertainty remains. The Alaskan wilderness is enormous. Many regions are rarely visited. investigators have long suspected that not every secret was uncovered. As the years passed, Hansen became one of the most infamous serial killers in American history. His crimes were featured in books, documentaries, and television programs. Criminal profilers studied his behavior. Law enforcement agencies examined the investigation for lessons that could help solve future cases. One of the most important lessons involved victim selection. Historically, disappearances involving vulnerable individuals sometimes received less attention. The Hansen case demonstrated the dangers of that approach. Every missing person deserves to be taken seriously. Every victim matters. Many experts believe earlier recognition of patterns among the disappearances might have prevented additional deaths. The case also highlighted the importance of survivor testimony. Without Cindy Paulson's escape, Hansen may have continued killing. Her courage changed everything. Against overwhelming odds, she survived. She provided investigators with the breakthrough they desperately needed. In many ways, she became the turning point in the entire investigation. Years later, Hansen's health began declining. He spent decades behind bars. The man who once used Alaska's vast wilderness as a hunting ground would never walk free again. On August 21, 2014, Robert Hansen died at the age of 75. His death ended the life of one of America's most disturbing serial killers. But it did not end the story. The victims remain the most important part of this case. For years, many of them were known only as missing persons. Some were forgotten by society. Some were dismissed because of their lifestyles or circumstances. Yet each victim was a human being with dreams, fears, families, and a future that was stolen. Their stories deserve to be remembered. The legacy of the Hansen case extends beyond true crime. It serves as a warning about predators who hide behind ordinary appearances. It reminds investigators to look beyond stereotypes. And it demonstrates the importance of listening to victims, even when their stories are difficult to hear. Today, the forests and mountains of Alaska remain as beautiful as ever. Tourists continue to visit. Pilots continue to fly across the wilderness. Life moves forward. Yet hidden among those landscapes is the memory of a dark chapter in Alaskan history. A chapter written by a baker who appeared harmless. A man trusted by neighbors. A father. A businessman. A hunter. And ultimately, one of the most terrifying serial killers America has ever known. For more than a decade, Robert Hansen turned Alaska's wilderness into a killing ground. He believed the vast forests would hide his crimes forever. In the end, they didn't, because one victim escaped. One survivor spoke, and the truth finally emerged from the wilderness.